Hi gentlemen, in this video we are going to start looking at Economics Unit 1 Topic 3, which is all about markets, demand, supply and those type of topics. Now, in order for this to work well, we need to start with the basics. And the basics that we're going to cover in this video is what are markets, and what is the price mechanism. Now, once we understand what these two things are, we now have a solid foundation to build on when we start analyzing demand and supply. Okay, so without any further ado, let's get started. At any point in this video, if you're confused, if you're not sure what's happening, feel free to stop, rewind, or send me a chat through Teams. So we can work that out, okay? So let's start with markets. What are markets as a key topic? Now, let me be very clear. Markets, industries, sectors, these are all very different concepts. An industry would be a group of competitors that sell maybe a similar good or service, and in that industry they are competing for customers. The industry is a combination of sellers. A sector is then when we group industries together. So we can group the agricultural industry, the fisheries industry, the forestry industry, and group that in what we call the rural sector, okay, because they're all similar industries grouped in a sector. They are different. We're looking at markets. Now, a market by definition, I mean, that would be a good place to start. Let's define it. A market is a situation where buyers and sellers meet for the purpose of exchange. That is a textbook definition of a market. Now, a few key points there. A market contains buyers and sellers. Okay, these are the two opposing groups within a market. Buyers, well, demand goods and services. Sellers are those that are going to supply goods and services. Now, the traditional market was a physical location. It was, I'm going to produce my goods, I'm going to take them to market where buyers are going to be wandering around and I will physically sell my goods. In the 21st century, markets can be physical or they can be electronic, and a lot of markets now are electronic, where you can buy something over the phone, you can buy something online, or you can physically go and purchase goods and services. So markets could be on any situation, physical or electronic, where buyers and sellers are exchanging goods and services for money, okay, for some type of currency. So that's a market. Now, we can unpack this concept even further and look at the most common types of markets. Now, the most common types of markets we have, I would say the most common market is the goods and services markets. And like the name very clearly suggests, the goods and services market will be any good or service that's being sold. For example, we could say the market for cars. Okay, and what the market for cars now tells us is that's everyone who wants to buy a car and everyone who's willing to sell a car would be in this market. Okay, that's a good. If we're going to give an example of a service, we could say the market for, I don't know, gardening. Okay. Anyone looking to hire a gardener to perform a service, and everyone who's willing to sell their time, okay, to help in the garden. That's probably the most common type of market, okay. But there are others. We're going to be looking at, as well as just goods and services, we're going to be looking at the financial market. Now, the financial market is sometimes called the capital market as well. They're synonymous, okay? The financial market is when we see financial products. So it could be the market for high interest savings accounts. That's a financial product. It could be the market for a particular share in a company. So a common financial market is the stock market. Where we can purchase financial products, being shares in a company, okay? Buyers of shares and sellers of shares. And the last most common type of market would be the labour market. Okay, labour being the physical and mental efforts of employees within a business. So how does the labour market work? Well, I'm thinking about myself. I am giving my labour, my mental and physical efforts to Terrace, okay? I am the seller because I control my labour. I control that factor of production. And I'm going to sell my labour to Terrace. Terrace is the buyer. So the employer is the buyer, the employee is the seller within the labour market. Okay, so let's make a note of that. The seller is the employee, the buyer is the employer. Okay, and that's how the labour market operates. Now, there are many, many more types of markets out there. These are just the most common, which, as you'll see over Unit 1, Topic 3, these are going to come up quite often. So these are the different types of markets. Now, it exposes us to this idea, if I reflect back on this first one, it exposes us to the idea of goods and services. Now, which I'm sure you innately understand the difference between goods and services, but it's something that we need to have a really, really clear understanding of. So let's just unpack that for a second. Goods, can you see that? There we go. Goods versus services. Okay. Again, fundamental that we understand this. If we start with goods, goods are items of value that are physically tangible. Okay, so this morning, before I got into work, I bought myself a coffee, okay? It is a good. I'm physically touching it. It is tangible. Oh, delicious. It's consumable. It is a good, okay? You know, some goods might also require storage because they are physically tangible. They're going to take up physical space. So a good is tangible, okay? The distinction then is that a service is intangible. A service is something which is performed in exchange for money. So like I said earlier, you want to hire a gardener, then that's a service. They're going to cut your lawn, they're going to tidy up the flower beds for you in exchange for money. There's nothing tangible there. It is something which is performed, okay? It's like going to see a movie. Are you receiving anything tangible when you sit in the seat and you watch the movie? No. Something's being performed. It's an experience, okay? It's a service which is on offer, okay? So that's the distinction between goods and services. Now, we can break this down even further. And if we look at goods, there are several different types of goods two of which we need to understand really, really well. So some goods are competitive, otherwise known as their substitution goods or their competitive goods. It means the same thing. Now, a competitive good is like a competitive want. It's goods that are easily substituted for one another. They are competitive in nature when they can be easily substituted. So a competitive good could be something like coffee or tea. They are substitution goods, they are competitive goods because it is innately one or the other. It's very unlikely we're going to consume both or demand both. Okay, you're going to demand one based on your tastes and preferences. The other category of goods that we can look at are goods that are complementary. They are goods that are complementary in nature. Complementary, well, they complement each other. They innately or they naturally go together. Okay, so once again, this is the only thing I've got on my desk. Once again, I bought a coffee this morning. When I buy a coffee, what naturally goes with that? It could be milk, it could be sugar, it could be some type of a flavoring like a hazelnut shot. Disgusting, but anyway, they complement each other. Another example could be, if I buy a house, awesome, I'm also going to want the complementary good of furniture. Okay, just to use a different example. They complement each other, they go together. So we can classify goods in those ways. And this will actually become incredibly important when we look at demand. Okay, so please lock that away. Furthermore, we can look at goods and services another way in terms of, are these goods and services public or are they private? Okay, in nature. So let's unpack that a little bit. Let's start with a private good. That's the most, the easiest one to look at. A private good or service is something which is, privately demanded. It's consumed by the buyer. It's consumed by the individual that has purchased that good. So when I bought this coffee, this is a private good because I bought it and it is consumed by the individual that purchased it. Okay, so we might say that it is purchased and consumed by the buyer. Okay, it's a private good, belongs to me, you can't have it. Public goods and services are then those which have been provided for the community. For example, the local park. Okay, the local park has been provided by the local government for the community to consume, for the community to enjoy. Now, public goods in particular are essential because they often don't have a significant profit margin or a profit motive behind providing that good. Let's think about it. A private company wouldn't naturally just decide out of the goodness of their hearts to build a park for the community unless there's a profit motive there, a long-term profit motive. So often the government needs to step in and say, okay, these goods wouldn't usually be provided in the marketplace. So we as the government need to step in and provide these goods. Okay, the same with services. A public service could be rubbish collection. So every week, the local council picks up our rubbish. Now, if that was left to the private sector, it probably wouldn't be a thing. Or if it was a thing, it would be pretty expensive. So the government steps in and says, this is a service that the community needs, we should provide it. Okay, so a public good or service, something which is provided by the government. Okay, and it's important that in an economy there are both private and public goods to satisfy all our needs and wants. Okay, the last thing we want is partial or complete market failure if these goods aren't available to us. Okay, so what we've just done there is we've just broken down goods and services a bit more, something which I'm sure you already knew, but we've just integrated some key vocabulary that is very much economics in nature. So what have we got? We've got markets, we've got the types of markets, we've got goods and services. All right, this is good. Now we're at a point where we're actually going to start linking markets to some of the topics that we've seen before. For example, we can link this concept of markets to the economic problem. So let's go back to that. The economic, oops, can you see that? That's better. The economic problem. Something we did in, I believe it was topic 1, could have been topic 2, but either way, we've done this. Now, what was the economic problem? Okay, let's think about it logically. The economic problem is that resources are scarce. So resources are scarce, or resources are limited, let's say that. But our wants are unlimited. That is a problem. Okay, when resources are limited but wants are unlimited, that leads to this concept of relative scarcity. Okay, leads to scarcity. Okay, so what happens next? Got so many colors to choose from. Okay, we have relative scarcity, so we need to make choices. Okay, there's the necessity to make choices on how we're going to use our resources. And as you guys know, when we make choices, we will be confronted with some form of opportunity cost. The next best alternative will need to be foregone when we make a choice. Okay? Now, because we need to make choices, we've got to ask ourselves 3 key questions within an economy. Those questions being, what and how much are we going to produce within our economy? You know, what is it that we're making with our scarce resources? And how much of it should we make? The second question is, how are we going to make these goods and services? Are we going to use labor? Are we going to use capital equipment? Are we going to produce them overseas where labor is cheaper? How are we going to produce these goods and services? And finally, we need to ask ourselves, for who are we making this stuff for? Now, the economic problem marries very well with this concept of markets, because it is buyers and sellers that are going to determine what and how much of something is produced, how it's going to be produced, and for who. For which buyers are we producing products? So if I think recently, okay, what are we going to produce? Well, right now we're going through this whole COVID-19 health crisis. So what does an economy want to produce? Well, we want to produce the essentials: food, water. We want to produce, right now we want to produce ventilators. So a lot of companies, which are just normal manufacturing companies, are stopping their normal manufacturing and they're making ventilators instead. You know, we've got alcohol companies. What are they producing? Well, actually not producing as much alcohol anymore, at least for drinking. They're producing alcohol or hand sanitizer for personal health. What businesses are producing is dependent on the wants of the market, of the buyers in the market. Now, how do they produce? Well, some buyers want to buy locally sourced. Other buyers couldn't care less, but that's going to affect how the company makes their product, whether they make it over in a low-cost Asian nation or whether they make it here in Australia. How they produce is based on what their buyers want. And finally, for who? Which buyers are the sellers trying to target? You know, they're trying to target high income demographic or the low income demographic. Who are they targeting? Okay, so markets and the economic problem are very, very much intertwined. Okay, but it's not only the economic problem that markets interact with, it's also the circular flow of income, which was one of the very early models we looked at. So if we look at the circular flow of income. All right. Now I'm just gonna use the two-sector model, okay? Just for this example. So we have the production sector and we have the household sector. In our simple economy here, in our two-sector model. Now, the real flows, let's start with the real flows, not the money flows. The real flows being that households control the factors of production. The most straightforward one is our labor. We control our labor. No one can tell me where I can work. I will choose where I want to apply. Right? In using the factors of production, land, labor, capital, enterprise, which we control, in our market economy, in our mixed market economy, businesses then will be able to produce output of goods and services using the factors of production. Then we have the monetary flows. If I'm giving my labor or if I'm selling some land to a business, what do I expect? Well, I expect some type of income, a wage, a salary, something like that in return for my efforts. Now that I have an income, I can engage in consumption expenditure. Okay, I can now purchase some of this output. Again, markets are integrally involved in the circular flow of income because the production sector is where we find the sellers in the marketplace. The household sector is where we find the buyers in the marketplace. Okay, now what we buy, well, that's our consumption. What we sell, that's the output. Okay, so markets are very, very much represented in the economic problem and the circular flow of income. Okay, it's all interconnected. So here we have what I think is a pretty good summary of markets, okay, which you can investigate further by reflecting on the pages in the textbook. Okay. So that's the first concept, markets. Now let's look at the price mechanism. Okay, I'm going to just turn over the page. Let's use the other side. Oh, it's kind of highlighter's bled through, so let's use a new piece of paper. So let's start looking now at the price mechanism. Okay, the price mechanism. Now, this is really, really important because it obviously refers to the price of goods and services. Now, in actual fact, the price mechanism is this economic concept which helps us understand how the price can influence, or the price is an outcome of the different forces within the marketplace. The different forces within the marketplace being demand from buyers and supply of sellers. These forces interact in the setting of the price. It is the price mechanism at work as demand and supply interact to set the price of goods and services. Okay, so that's the price mechanism. You know, I bought this for $4.50 this morning. I bought this. Now, why is it $4.50? Well, it's the price mechanism. It's How much am I willing to pay versus how much a seller's willing to sell for? It's the price mechanism at work. Okay. Now, it's probably important that we have a textbook definition for this as well, for the price mechanism, and that would be the system or process by which price changes bring about equality between supply and demand in a market. So that's your textbook definition. Okay. So let's have a look at that. It's obviously referring to supply and demand. The supply of sellers, demand from buyers. Two concepts that we'll unpack more in future videos. So if I think about this, we have two opposing forces affecting the price mechanism, okay, or even being affected by the price mechanism. We have our buyers that demand goods and services, and we have the sellers in the marketplace who are supplying. You could not have two more opposing groups, because what do we want as buyers? Well, as buyers, we're bound by relative scarcity. We don't have much money. So we want the lowest prices. We are going to put some serious downwards pressure on the price. Sellers, they have the exact opposite motivation. As a seller, you want to be able to offload your product at the highest cost, at the highest price, so you can widen your profit margin between how much it costs you to produce that good or service and how much you're selling it for. So sellers want the highest price for their products. These are opposing points of view. Now, as these two forces interact, it inevitably results in a market price being set. It influences the price mechanism, and it'll eventually establish the market price. Okay, as these two different forces are at play in the marketplace. Now, sometimes we also have the government that gets involved and can influence the price mechanism. And sometimes the government will lower prices. Okay, so I think about things like some property which is rent controlled, okay, where they it's like government supported accommodation, where they lower the price of rent on a weekly or fortnightly basis to allow for marginalized people who are doing it tough, to have somewhere to live. So sometimes they lower prices. Other times, the government can actually increase prices and say, well, for that particular good or service, we're going to up the price because maybe those businesses within that market are doing it tough at the moment. So it's only right that we increase the price of that product to help out those struggling businesses. It could be the dairy producers. The dairy producers are doing it tough. I mean, bushfires, droughts, floods, tropical cyclones. I mean, they really do cop it. So perhaps the government might want to increase the price of milk so that those businesses get more money. The government, as well as buyers and sellers, influence the price mechanism. Okay, something we'll look at in a lot more detail. So that's just a general overview of what the price mechanism is And in future videos, we're going to be unpacking demand and supply in more detail. So we've covered the basics of topic 3, the markets and price mechanism. To learn about this in more detail, please reflect on the relevant chapters in the textbook. Please reflect on these slides. And we now have a solid foundation to start this new topic. Best of luck.